all right, is what do you think some of the reasons are for the ACL? Why do you think ACLs are tearing? What do you think some of the reasons are? Aaron, I'm going to go with you first.
Okay. So we talk a lot about having the inside ankle bone, whether the difference between high and low. And we say that a lot of athletes who have that low ankle bone that's where a lot of the ACL injuries come from, because as that ankle bone collapses in, then that knee collapses in as well. And that can cause them to have this ACL injury, whether it's contact or non-contact. But I know we talk a lot about that. So I think that is one big thing that is definitely very common in a lot of people with ACL injuries.
Excellent. Coach Luke?
My personal take on this is athletes nowadays are lifting more than ever. And while they are getting bigger, faster, stronger, they're also, if they're not lifting correctly, then they're decoding themselves at a really rapid rate. And that's why you see some of these like really strong or really well-to-do athletes, they get hurt so quickly. And that's because while their muscles are strong, their tendons and their ligaments and all that, they're not keeping up with their muscles. So while they're getting bigger and faster and stronger, they're not doing it correctly. And then that's why they're getting hurt.
Excellent. Coach Lindsay?
So I play volleyball, which is a jumping and landing heavy sport. And I think most, if not all, of ACL injuries happen at the net when the girl is jumping and landing. Sometimes they, land on one leg falling backwards, or they land and quickly turn to pivot and turn around behind them, and then they hear that pop. So I think that having proper jumping and landing mechanics is really, really crucial when you're in a sport, not just volleyball, but, basketball, any other sport where you have to make quick, explosive movements. I think it's really important to have a foundation in jumping and landing so you can minimize the chance of injury.
Excellent. Coach Chris?
Yeah, I think the way that people train nowadays and a lot of coaches' mindsets are the more somebody can lift, the more weight they can put up, the better they must be able to perform on the field. So they sacrifice form, like the previous three coaches have talked about. They sacrifice their form, when they're squatting, to be able to put up 500, 600 pounds, because they think that they say it relates to your performance on the field. But I don't think that's true. I think you reach a point where, a football player, why does a running back have to be able to squat 600 pounds when his job is to be quick down the field? And yeah, granted, he has to be able to hold his own and he has to be strong to push through after hits and stuff. But, if they're sacrificing form during their lifts just to get up more weight, then that's going to be replicated during the game. So when they're, breaking down to get that weight up, that movement pattern is just going to be replicated during the game. So I think the question is, does more weight really equal better performance?
I think you guys all brought up a good point, and you each hit on somewhat of a similar topic. And it's just, with the weightlifting part of it and the mechanics and the proper technique. When we looked at it 20 years ago when I was in therapy, we used to look at the big time play of what Lindsay said was the jumping and the landing mechanics, which are still piss poor in a lot of people. They don't do them properly. They're not taught. Coaches, sport coaches don't go over this. Even strength coaches and stuff aren't teaching the proper landing mechanics. And I think that's causing a lot of the issues that we see, because people are like, I think Luke said it, Coach Luke said it, people are being decoded. We're being decoded out of how we should move to what we should do. And it doesn't always mean what we should do right now is correct. And that's having a lasting effect on certain things and why these injuries are going up. And just to give you a case here, they're saying anywhere between 5 to 9 times females are at higher risk than their male counterparts. Now, I've seen a huge shift that males are starting to tear theirs at a higher rate, as we see in the NFL over the last 5-6 years, an astronomical amount. I think there's been over 40 every single year. The one year, I think there was 62, if I'm not mistaken, like 2 or 3, 4 years ago. This year, we're getting up into the 40s, close to 50 range. My question to you guys is, why do you think, though, females still have a higher rate of ACLs than the male counterparts? Coach Chris, go ahead.
I think first it comes down to the anatomy of the way the female body is made up compared to the male body. The male body usually has a little bit more body mass, or a little bit more muscle mass, whereas the female body is usually a little bit more lean, and so I think that kind of lean body type and the elasticity of the kind of muscles and the ligaments in the female body is kind of what leads to that increased rate of injury, ACL injury risk.
Excellent. Coach Aaron.
I think Chris has a good point with like the anatomy of it. And one thing that I always think about is how the differentiation between the pelvis of the female versus the pelvis of the male. The female has that wider pelvis, so they have the wider walking stance, and that gait is what we talk about, of having the right gait pattern is what's going to prevent from these injuries. So I think the way that the female walks versus the way that the male walks, I think it's easier for the males to have that proper walking pattern instead of the females, just because of the way that their lower body is made up.
Coach Lindsay.
I agree completely with all of the anatomical points here, but I also wonder if maybe there's a social impact too of, just this idea of, we start our young boys in sports, and like we start them training early, we start them in sports early, we give them, access to these courses and these classes and things, because it's just like assumed that like the males will be the athletes. And then when females play sports, I almost wonder if it's like a societal influence of they start later, so they don't, they learn this prevention stuff later, or maybe not at all, because the emphasis was on, starting boys early in like Pee Wee football, while girls are, music classes or whatever, whenever they're being separated in sports. So I do definitely agree with the anatomy, but I also wonder if there's some societal influences that just, affect when each gender starts really training and learning the mechanics of running and jumping.
Excellent. Coach Luke.
Yeah, I'm going to go a little bit more off of what Aaron said, and the way that their pelvis of a female is wider than a man's is, and while that may also hinder the way that they walk, I think that can also impacts the way that they land as well, whether they're landing while they're landing, that they're running, landing while they're jumping, landing while they're doing anything really. I think that is another really big aspect of it, is because of how wide their pelvis is, and as opposed to a man's, is they might be landing differently as well.
I think you guys bring up some good points, and I think what we also have to look at is strength differential. And we always talk about the quad to the hamstring, okay, the 2-to-1 ratio and things like that, and how deceleration is being taught. And if we're not teaching deceleration, if people aren't understanding deceleration, it opens our bodies and our ability up to pull something, tear something, all those kind of things in between. And we talk about the female, we have to look like that, because we have to look at how many sport coaches are really emphasizing deceleration training. So I'll go to the two females right there. In all your times of playing, okay, Aaron, when you're playing lacrosse and stuff like that, Lindsay, when you're playing volleyball, how many people have emphasized the deceleration training, or for Lindsay, the proper landing mechanics? So ladies, go ahead, and Aaron, why don't you go first?
They don't really talk about deceleration. For us, it's more of the acceleration part, just because you do need that explosive first step. I think the one thing that really stands out to me, just like in deceleration, we talk about in lacrosse a lot of breaking down your feet when you're like on defense, because you can't have big strides. You need to be in your box and have that small choppy step. And I think that's where most often that comes in with deceleration wise. For me, I think that's like the only place that they have really ever like emphasized those slowing down patterns. Yeah,
I've never been formally taught deceleration in our like strength and agility sessions in college, we would do different tests of our acceleration every single week. And, we had the whole gym, like 3 courts lined up, and we do like a 20-yard dash, and you just kind of ran as fast as you could. And then like they stopped caring about you. Like once you got your time, we were never taught, how we should be decelerating and cooling down after each sprint. And I think most of it is just within the footwork that they teach you. Like they tell you like blocking patterns at the net, for example, when you're moving laterally, and then when you're jumping, landing, and pivoting, that most of the deceleration and mechanic talk is just in the footwork. It's not an additional emphasis in how to apply it in other motions or other sports. It's very just footwork specific, and you learn the footwork, and that does a good enough job like to get through without injury most of the time. There's not really an extra emphasis.
That's interesting because, some of the most important things that you guys mentioned, especially early on when we talked, is how important fundamentals are. And if you ask any coach, sports coach, they always, at least growing up when I was there, always talked about fundamentals. But I think almost every single coach out there that I've heard always misses the most basic fundamentals. And when I talk about basic fundamentals, I'm talking about learning how to actually move properly. So how many coaches that you guys have had, all 4 of you, and we'll start with Coach Luke here in a second, but how many have actually emphasized the basic fundamentals of just plain movement?
Very few. Most of them, it's very sports specific when, at least in baseball, because it's a very fine-tuned sport, that they teach specific fundamentals regarding the sport, but nothing as far as like the way you run, the way you move, the way you jump, anything like that.
Coach Chris?
Yeah, I mean, only you, Dave. Like Luke said, you get taught the basic fundamentals of how to move in your sport. Basic fundamentals of throwing pattern and where your feet should go when you throw and everything, or how your feet should move when you hit. But when it comes to just the basic fundamentals of everyday movement, I've only seen it here.
Coach Lindsay?
Yeah, what everyone else has been saying, I've only seen it at EXP.
Coach Aaron?
Yeah, I've definitely haven't had many coaches do it. I think the first exposure, honestly, was when Chris and I worked with the lacrosse team on Thursday. I know every single person on that team has never gone through motion like that to try to like work on their mechanics, especially for me because I have a stick in my hand the whole time. So you don't always focus on the motion of the arms or the explosive steps that you get in those fundamentals.
So you guys what do you then think is a solution to the problem? Because there is a huge problem. If we're not identifying this, and coaches aren't identifying it, and we're not doing a great job, and kids aren't getting aren't seeking outside help, what do you think some of the remedies should be? And we're going to go right down the line. I'm going to go Lindsay, Luke, Aaron, and Chris.
I mean, I think it's hard when you are an athlete and you're trying to lift, you're trying to train, you're trying to become really great at your sport, and you don't have those trainers and those coaches, those leaders to point you in the right direction. So I think that honestly, and this is kind of why I started coming to EXP too, but I think you at some point have to take responsibility for your own actions as an athlete and how you train as an athlete. And if you're saying like, I don't understand why my coach is having me do XYZ, look into it yourself. You have the power to do that. Not saying you all, like every athlete needs to like go read tons of research papers about one exercise, but just become a little informed on like, why is my coach stressing, the specific type of conditioning, or why are they not teaching me these different movement patterns, or why is this the footwork that they teach as opposed to this other footwork, and take that into your own hands. And then you can make the informed decision for yourself saying, okay, well, what they're teaching me isn't working for me. So where are some other places I can go? What are some other things I can train? What are some other things I can do to, try something new and follow more of what other people are seeing as success? And, I think eventually with your own motivation there, and then running into your local trainers and coaches and stuff, I think you will eventually hopefully find a balance and find that path that is optimal for training, which I think is great at EXP. But I think it starts with having that internal motivation of saying, you know what, I don't think this is going well, and I'm going to figure out why.
Yeah, I think Lindsay did really well with that. And building off, like, I obviously think that, seeking out help is really important, but then also making it part of your daily process. Here at Explosive Sports, we talk a whole lot about GOTA and everything, but if you only do it the 2-3 times a week that you show up to work out here, it's not going to get any better. And it has to become a daily thing, a routine thing, that when you're even so much as when you're walking, you're worried about, okay, landing on the right parts of your foot, training your body to move the right sort of way. So, you have to be constantly thinking about this as well. If you really do want to get the most out of yourself as an athlete, when you're just walking, like whether you're just walking to class, whether you're just walking to just anywhere, really just be focusing on, moving your body in the correct way, because decoding happens so quickly and so frequently that it's hard to recode yourself if you're not constantly thinking about it. So it's a marathon, not a sprint. You have to be working on it constantly. But yeah, you have to it has to be a long process of like trying to correct yourself and correct your movements.
Yeah, I really liked what Lindsay had to say about taking responsibility for yourself. And I think two things that come to mind for me is in high school, most kids, if they don't want to go to college for their sport, they're not very serious about the sport. So they kind of just think, okay, I'm going to do what I have to do just to get by, instead of pushing themselves to that next level to become more of a competitive athlete. And I think injuries of an athlete is what unfortunately pushes them to get that next step and seek out other help besides just what their coaches have. So I think, like Lindsay said, just becoming more internally motivated and pushing yourself as an individual is definitely what needs to happen for athletes, and like taking responsibility for their own actions.
Yeah, I think if you start out, looking for, where's the responsibility? I think if you look on the athlete side of it, I think parents spend too much time and too much money on, sport specific clinics and practices. And, well, my kid didn't have the best year hitting, so we're going to get more hitting clinics for him. Instead of hitting 3 times a week, we're going to hit 5 times a week. Or, he's not throwing as hard as I want him to, so we're going to throw harder. So I think on that side of it, is we push too much the sport specific stuff and, practicing that stuff. And we don't get our kids out to, places to train and to do strength training. Or you have the parents who, their kid plays baseball and they found Bryce Harper's workout on the internet. So they take them to Planet Fitness and have them do Bryce Harper's workout. And, they expect that to make them the starter on the high school baseball team. And then I think when you look at the coaching side of it, it just kind of stems back to the education system. I'm an exercise science major and I'm in my second to last semester here. I've taken most of like the movement classes and the exercise prescription classes. And I think we maybe had one day out of all those classes, maybe one lecture on ACL. And yeah, they talked about how, your inside ankle bone breaks in, your knee rotates internally, and that's what leads to ACL tears. And that was it. We didn't really discuss, okay, how can we as, students of this field, how can we go into this profession and decrease the likelihood of this injury? How do we treat it? We know why it happens, but how do we treat it? And I don't think that's being taught at the educational level right now. So I think, you can look at it from both sides of where the responsibility lies.
I think you guys have good points, and I think personal responsibility is a big thing. If you want to get better, you got to be able to willing to go out. Coaches only have so much time throughout the day, with their practices, so they're only going to give you so much. So you got to go and seek other advice. Just like if you're struggling in a class, it doesn't matter what class you're in. If you're struggling with that, you got to go seek help somewhere. And I think that's where a lot of people are hesitant because they think they're good, or they think that's not necessary because let's be honest, everybody here can walk. You know, we're all blessed to be able to walk. Most athletes I've seen can walk. They can run to some extent. If you're playing baseball, you probably can hit and throw. Now, here's the difference where I see it is just because I can throw a ball doesn't mean I throw it correctly. Okay? I could throw a ball, and I guarantee you, Chris could look at me and say, hey, listen, man, you have all kind of problems. You know what I mean, with this mechanical thing. So I think you guys are right on with that whole thing. I think you guys brought up some very good points. All right. Anything else you guys want to add in here while we tie this all up here with ACLs? What people should do? We'll go with Coach Luke, Lindsay, Aaron, and then Chris to end it out.
You know, honestly, I think that we covered the majority of it between having proper work, like working out properly, like having your more functional movements. Honestly, with as far as like the ACL goes, you just really need to constantly be working on, you know, strengthening your muscles around it, like working on your movements. And like I said earlier, it's a long process in order to get yourself fundamentally sound. But if you really do want to avoid getting injured, these are necessary precautions, because in order to be at the top of your game, in order to move on from level to level, now it's necessary to lift, because people are doing it all the time now, and people are getting bigger, faster, and stronger. So while it is really important to lift and get strong and get fast, you really need to be doing it properly. Otherwise, you're going to put too much stress on your body and won't be able to handle it. And then boom, next thing you know, you're hurt.
Yeah, as Coach Luke was saying, I think it's just important to start early and be intentional. I mean, this isn't saying like you have to add, you know, another couple workouts a week where you just focus on strengthening and stabilizing the lower body and the ACL, but just throwing a little something in, you know, every workout, watching how you walk, and, you know, just starting something as early as you can and just being intentional about it, whatever it is you choose to do. And I think if you do that consistently enough, then you should be in a really good shape to minimize your chances of injuries, while also being able to grow in the strength training aspect and grow in your sport.
Yeah, I think they both brought up really good points. I think taking less time to work on sports-specific stuff and just going back to the fundamentals is really what's going to help reduce the chances of becoming injured. And I think just starting at the basics, and even if you don't start young, just starting at the beginning and taking that time to get the specific movements down before you start working on lifting heavier or being specific about your sport. And I think that would really help to reduce the amount of injuries that we see.
Yeah, you know, I think you gotta look for it. You gotta go out and you gotta find the places that do it, the places that work on it, the places that preach it. You know, obviously, like if you follow our Instagram account, you know that like we're big on GOTA, because that's all we post about really. Once a week we post exercise videos breaking down different exercises and how we do GOTA with it. So, you know, I think you have to go out and find it. Because, you know, it's not always going to come right to you. You have to go out there and you have to find, and not just with ACL injury, but whatever you're specifically looking for training wise, you got to look for the places that do it, because they're not always going to come to you.
You know, guys, I agree, and I appreciate you guys being on. I hope, you know, many people out there are listening in, that you guys take this advice, and don't just take us. You got to go do your own looking things up, educating yourself. I think that's one of the keys that always frustrates me the most, is people just listen to one person. Now, if that person was God, then go be all by means, listen to him, because he knows all. But besides that, there's always going to be questions that you have, and you got to be willing to go find them. Just because you really like this guy and you think he's really teaching the right, he could be teaching you all incorrect, you know? And I think that's what you got to do when you're out there looking for certain people, looking for things to become better, you know, whether it's in, you know, as a quarterback coach or a throwing coach for baseball or kicking coach for soccer, whatever. You got to find a person who's actually going to have your best interest and understands the fundamentals, because the fundamentals are what's missing in today's society, from walking to movement, all that kind of stuff, to help us mitigate the injuries and continue to improve. And I know, you know, Coach Chris is getting ready to start up here with, I think, Coach Aaron here, an ACL program in the future that we're going to be doing for females. So definitely, contact Coach Chris here so he can get you all the information and stuff when we get that available. And also, we also do GOTA. They mention that many times throughout the whole thing. If you don't know it, all you got to do is type it into a Google search or whatever, GOTA, and you'll find tons of information. Trust me, I was hesitant on it when I first started looking into it about 1.5 years ago. But since then, my whole movement pattern has changed, and I feel phenomenal. So much better. I run better. I lift better. I do all that stuff. And it's all because I changed how I move, because I was decoded, like Coach Luke said earlier on. I was decoded and I had to be recoded. So if you want more information on that, we do adult stuff. We do young kid stuff. It's all invaluable. I'm telling you, it's not just about sports. It's about your life, the longevity of how well you move well into your life. Because I see too many people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s that are like crippled when they walk. And that's something we don't want to do anymore. So guys, I appreciate it. You guys were awesome. Phenomenal job. Proud of you guys. All right, guys, any questions for us, you guys can always reach out to us. We're more than happy to answer anything we can do to help you guys out, become better. You guys take care and stay blessed.